Parallel and intercepting routes can work together in Next.js to not only provide a modal window, but also provide a fallback route segment. Let's check it out. Hello and welcome, I'm Dave. Today I'll help you understand how parallel and intercepting routes can work together in Next.js. And I'll provide links to all resources in the description below. Hey everyone, I'm Dave, and before we get started with today's tutorial, I am back from a 7-day vacation with my family. No computers. You can see I've still got the 7-day beard here that I usually have shaved. And I just want to take a minute to say I'm thankful for this industry, for software engineering, computer science, web development, all of that, where I can provide a vacation like that for my family. And I hope I'm helping you get started or continue in this industry. And if I am, please leave a comment on this video. I always like to hear that feedback, whether I'm helping you get your first job or there's some I've heard from that I'm helping that are already working in the industry. I just love to hear that feedback. It also helps if you give the video a thumbs up, and of course, if you haven't yet, subscribe. And now let's get started with today's topic. Today we're going to look at an advanced pattern in Next.js where we use a parallel route and intercepting route in combination to provide a modal, and then the fallback is the original route segment that would have been displayed if we hadn't intercepted it. Now, in my last video, I already covered Next.js parallel routes. So if you haven't watched that, that's really a prerequisite for this video. I'll provide a link to that right now and also a link to that video in the description. It's fairly short and will get you up to speed quickly. So if you haven't seen that, watch it now and then come back to this video. I'm also going to use the shadcn UI library and the dialog component that it provides to create the modal. So I'll walk you through that step by step. Let's get started. All right, I'm in VS Code, and to save some time, I've already started a Next.js project, but I haven't added the parallel or intercepting routes yet or the modal, so we'll create all of those today. But first, let's just look at what I've got to start with. And of course, you can download the completed code at the link in the video description. So what I've got to start with is a Next.js project, and I'm using currently the latest Next.js 14.2.3. Now, the release candidate for Next.js 15 has been announced, but it's not the stable version yet. So when you install the latest, at least as of today, you still get 14.2.3. So that's what I'm going with. Now after that, let's go ahead and look at a couple of other configuration files. One is the next.config.mjs file. You'll see a couple of things I've added. One is the experimental stale times, and this is something that's getting updated when they switch over to the stable version of Next.js 15, where you will have the opposite essentially. You wouldn't have to set this, but right now I've set dynamic to 0, so anytime I use a link that it's not going to be cached. And then the static is 180, but I've just got the dynamic to 0 here. You can do this to your preference if you want to. Other than that, I've also got in a remote pattern for the images. If you've worked with images in Next.js, you know you need to do this if you provide the full URL. And I'm just hosting the images with the project. So they're really at localhost with port 3000, but I need to provide this remote pattern because that's how I set it up, and I'm providing the full URL in the source of the images. Now next we can see where the images are, and they're in the public directory as you might expect. I've got 3 pictures of coffee here, which I love, Americanos, so I've got 3 pictures of Americanos, a couple of hot and 1 iced. And then after that, I want to point out that I'm not using an external server. I'm just mocking that essentially with JSON server. And for that, I've got a data folder and images.json. And I'll show you how to start the JSON server if you're not familiar with it. But here is the JSON file, and it's got this images property here that has an array, and then it's got this data. So we're going to start that as if we're requesting data from a server. We'll pull all of this into the project. So let me show you how to start JSON server if you're not familiar. And it looks like I need to go ahead and exit the project, and maybe I had JSON server running. I did, so I need to exit that as well. Okay, so we'll start from scratch here, and I'll put clear just to clear all of that out. So now we don't have JSON server running, we don't have the project running. I'm going to type npx JSON-server. Now a couple of flags here, -w for watch, and we're going to tell it to watch the data folder, and then look at the images.json file. we're also going to say -p for port, because by default, JSON server would start on port 3000. That's also where we run our dev example of our Next.js application. So let's just move it to port 3500. Now, when I press enter, we should get a response from the JSON server that yes, it has found our images and that's where they're available at. So now it is running. So if you haven't opened a second terminal, go ahead and click the plus sign here to open a second terminal window. And then I'll go to my second terminal here where we can also clear this out and start over. And I'll just type npm run dev to start our project. And now our Next.js project should be at localhost 3000. I'm going to press Control and click on that to launch that in the browser, and I'll see if it is launched in my browser here. And here is the example project. You can see I've got a coffee feed with the Americano pictures. So just the home page is essentially a feed of these coffee images. Now, when I click on any image, it will take me to the route segment that will display just one image. So I can do this for the second Americano, and here we are. If I go back, it would do it for the third one as well. Or I could do it for the first one. You can see how this works. And I'm clicking the back button here, but I could click the header as well to take me back to the feed. Now that is our basic example project. So we have a feed, and then we can click on any image, and then we go to the route segment and display that. But we really want to display the images in a modal instead of going to that route segment. We will use the route segment as a fallback, but we're going to intercept that route and display these images in a modal. Okay, we're back in VS Code. Go ahead and stop the project if you haven't, or stop the application with Control-C. Now we need to add shadcn to our project because we're going to use that dialog component that it provides to create the modal. So let's go ahead and do that now. We'll type npx shadcn-ui at latest, and then also type init and press enter. Once we do that, it should ask us some questions after it pulls in the library. I'm going to go with the default. That's fine. I like the stone color. You can pick whichever theme you want to get started here. And after that, yes, I want to use CSS variables. It's going to add several files to our project if you haven't worked with shadcn. If you have, you're already familiar with that, but I also have a video tutorial on getting started with shadcn that you can find on my channel. I'll link to that in the description as well. Okay, it is initialized shadcn. Let's go ahead and take a look now at our project. There's one change. Oh, I didn't add the dialog because with shadcn, you not only have to initialize it in your project, you have to add in any individual component that you want to add. We want the dialog component. Let me open that window back up with Control and backtick to open the terminal window. I want to type npx shadcn-ui once again at latest, and then we'll type add dialog, and this will add the dialog component for shadcn. And then we'll of course look at our file tree to see what it has added. And I'm going to make one other change. I just like to apply dark mode. It's a little easier on my eyes. Okay, now we've added that. Let's look over here at the tree, and you can see we now have a components directory and a lib directory. So it adds a utils.ts file, uses tailwind merge. That's all that does. After that, in the components directory, we have a UI folder, and here is where our dialog component is. Now we don't want to change anything in that. We'll leave that as it is, but now we have the dialog component. What I do want to change is just by default, I'm not going to apply the light and dark mode. However, if you want to do that, I have a video on that you can find on my channel. But what I'm going to do quickly is just override the light mode here where it has root. So I'm going to scroll down to where it has the dark class, and I'm going to delete this. I'm just going to put root here as well. So this root below the one from above will override that. So now it's just going to apply this as the root, which is dark mode. So just a shortcut. This totally eliminates the light mode though. So if you want to have both in your project or be able to toggle those, look for my other video, which of course I can link below. Okay, that said, I'm going to close this global CSS directory. Let's look at how the application is set up so far. And I'm co-locating some components that I didn't put in a components directory. Notice like the header component here is just right here in the top level of the app directory alongside the page and the layout. So when we look at the page here, What I'm doing is pulling in this photo display component, and then I'm looping through that with all the images, and I'm displaying each one inside the photo display component. So we're going to reuse that. When I get over here to the photo route segment, then we can see it receives a photo ID. So if we look at that page, we'll get that photo ID and a param. Let me go ahead and wrap that down so you can see here's the props, here is the params, and we're receiving the photo ID. It's fetching all of that data from our JSON server here at localhost and port 3500 where we started it. Also set the cache to no store, doing everything I could to override that default caching. And then after that, if we don't have a photo for the ID that's provided, of course, we want to cover that with no photo found for that ID, so at least we're returning something. Otherwise, we'll display the photo inside that same photo display component that I have co-located here as well. And here's the photo display component. And I could also Alt-Z just so that wraps down and you can see everything, but it's essentially using a link here wrapped around a div and the image component from Next.js. So that's our photo display component. And you can look at all of that. I'm not going to go into each detail there because that's not really what we're focusing on. What we want to do is intercept this photo route. But at first, what I need to do is create a parallel route. So inside the app directory, let's create a parallel route. And we'll call this modal. Now remember, parallel routes start with this @ symbol that we have right here. So I'll press enter there. Now after that, we also need to create a default file inside of this parallel route or nothing will work. Now in this instance, we're going to intercept the route. So the default file won't be the fallback. If you want to learn more about those default files, remember to watch my parallel routes video that I said was a prerequisite to this one because I go into more detail about those. However, in this instance, we need the file. Next.js wants the file or it won't let anything work. But however, we don't have to do anything with the file other than return null. So let's set that up. I can just say export default function, then say default. And then inside this function, I can just return null. So this file essentially does nothing other than it's required by Next.js for all of this to work. Okay, and one more step with a parallel route that is easy to overlook. Let's go to the layout file because we need to add our parallel route to the layout. So here inside of the root layout is where we're working because we're just intercepting that one route and it's right here at the top essentially. Let's go ahead and put in the modal. And then after that, we also need to add it here. So I'm going to Shift Alt and the down arrow to copy down the children and switch this to the modal as well because it is also a React.React node here as far as the type goes. Then we're going to render that here in the body. And I want to put the modal right above the children and below the header. So there is the modal as well. So remember when you create a parallel route that you also need to add it to whatever layout you're working with there in your segment. And in this case, we're in the root layout of this project. So let's save that. And now we can create the intercepting route to work with this. And there's some conventions there that can be a little confusing. So let's quickly look at the docs. I'm in the Next.js docs on the intercepting routes page, and I'm at the convention subtopic here. Now this is what can get confusing when you set up an intercepting route. It's what parentheses and how many dots to use, essentially. It says intercepting routes can be defined with the parentheses ... convention, which is similar to a path that would have the ... / when you import something, except we're putting these dots in parentheses. So one dot matches a segment on the same level. That's what we're going to use today. Don't count the parallel route directory that starts with the @ symbol. That is not a level. That's ignored. It's not part of your route. It's just used to identify the parallel route in Next.js. So we'll be using one dot. However, I've often seen it with two dots. That would be matching a segment one level above. And now look at this. Instead of adding two dots / and another two dots, it's a set of parentheses and another set of parentheses, both with two dots, to match two levels above. But if you are down into a subdirectory and you need to match something in the root app directory, you're going to use three dots. Now that's a little confusing because we're also kind of working in that root app directory as we went right into a segment. However, we're on the same level, so we're going to use 1. I just want to point all of this out, and you have to experiment with this a little bit if it's confusing. And I'll link to the docs for the intercepting routes in the video description also. Okay, we're back in VS Code, and now we're ready to create this intercepting route. So it's going to be inside the modal directory. So I'll create another new directory, and I'll start with parentheses dot parentheses, and now I want it to match the photo directory. So at this point, I'm going to type photo right after that. Now everything else here needs to mirror what we have in our actual route segment here that is photo. So after that, we had a photo ID that was a param here that's accepted, so we need to add that as well. So we'll also create a folder that is photo ID here inside of brackets, not parentheses. And then after that, we had our page.tsx file and the photo display. Now we don't need to recreate the photo display component. I co-located it here, so we'll just import that. But let's just copy this page.tsx file, and we'll need to make a few changes because the imports will change, but we can still create a page.tsx file right here. And then we can paste this in and just make the necessary changes, as some things won't be in the same place and other things we won't really need to recreate. So let's go ahead and get started with that. Instead of this import photo display here, if I just start retyping it, it should find where it actually is. You can see it's a much longer path. And then this type that we have here, we created that type in the other file too. So we could just delete this. Now we could say import type, and we could have photo data, and it will import it from where we'd already created it. So we don't have to recreate everything. But I'm basically going to stop there. Of course, you could stop recreating the type props or anything else you want to work on as well, but I'll stop right there. Now, we essentially have the same page. We haven't created the modal yet. So now that we intercept the route and we essentially have mirrored the route, now we want to apply a modal to this intercepted route. Now to do that, I'm going to scroll down to the components directory, and I'm actually going to use it and not co-locate this component. So I will put it inside of the components directory. So let's create a new file, and let's just call it modal.tsx. Now inside of this, we'll immediately start with use client, because this will be a client component. Now I'm going to import Dialog from, let's find the right one. So we want it to be from shadcn, so it would be the UI Dialog. But we also need a couple of other imports here as well. So I'm going to put these on separate lines. So what I'm going to do is put each import on a new line here. So I'll have Dialog, and then I want Dialog overlay. And then I also want Dialog content. So we've imported all three of those now from shadcn. Now there's one other import we need, and that is use router. So we're going to get use router. It's going to come from next navigation. Okay, we've imported everything we need. I'm going to say export function modal. And now this modal is going to receive children like we would in a layout. And after that, of course, we need to provide the type. So let's go here and we'll say this type is children, and this is a react.react node, just like we saw earlier in the layout file that we were working with. Okay, we've provided all of that, but we don't have a return yet, so it still doesn't like our modal. Inside of here, we're going to say const router equals use router. Capitalize that. Now that we have our router, we also want to create a function that just handles the open change for the modal. So we'll call this handle open change. After that, we've got our arrow here. And then inside of this function, all we're going to do is call router.back. Now, why would we do that when it closes? Well, it will change the URL bar, so then it won't still be displaying the specific image URL. It will go back to displaying the previous URL. So that's important as well. Hey, now we're ready for our return in this component. So we'll have return, our parentheses. Let's start with the dialog component itself. Now the dialog component is going to have a default open. We're going to set that to true. Now a lot of times when you're working with a dialog or a modal, you would have a trigger that would open it. We want this one to open by default, so we set that to true. But because we're using the handle open change function as well, we also need to set open to true. So now we've set both of those. And after that, we'll have our on open change. So I guess that's the actual API function, and I named the other one handle open change just out of habit. I guess I create ones called handle. You could name it whatever you want, but handle open change is recommended, or at least that's what I usually default to my naming pattern. I'm going to press Alt-Z just so all of that shows, but on open change is the actual name that is with the API here from the dialog. So I misspoke about that earlier. After that, we want the dialog overlay. It's not going to have any props. We just need that to wrap everything else. And finally, we have the dialog content. Now, after we have dialog content, I'm going to apply a class name here. So class name equals, inside of this, I'm going to say overflow-y-hidden. So anything that would overflow would be hidden instead of displaying or having a scroll bar. I don't want that with this particular modal. You could style it, of course, according to how you want it. Now, after that, we just need to have the children here. And that is our complete modal using the dialog component from shadcn. Now, there's more you could learn about the dialog component, and I'll link that to that below as well. But this will provide a nice modal that will allow you to click away and it will close and it will adjust the URL as we expect it to be. Okay, now we're ready to apply this modal to our intercepted route. So all we need to do is go back to our intercepted route and the page.tsx file that we have. Let's import this modal. So here we go, import modal, and there it is at components modal. And after that, we need to wrap what we have here inside of the modal. But we really don't need this div with the class names I had provided when it was a static page. So I'm just going to delete the div that we have wrapped around everything and instead replace it with the modal component. So we have the opening and closing. I'll put the closing one, of course, after. Save that, and we should be ready to check out our application. So let's open this up and go ahead and type npm run dev. If you don't have the project started, quickly look at your other terminal window to ensure that the JSON server is still running. We can request that data from the mock server. And now the project is running at localhost 3000. I will control click to get that going. Here's the application in the browser. I'm going to recommend that you hold down the shift key and refresh just to make sure you don't have anything cached in your browser window. Could be unexpected and you might not get the modal, but what should happen is if you click on one of the images, you should now get a nice modal that has our photo display component inside. So you get the title and the image, and this should happen for each one of these images. Now, when I say we have a fallback, notice the URL does change and it says photo 3 here, and when I close, it changes back just to our localhost 3000, which would be our home page. But when I say fallback, for example, if we were to refresh the page while it says photo/1, we're going to get that original route segment, and that would be our fallback. So now we have the page that has the image displayed as we previously did before we added that modal. So now I click the top here that says the coffee feed to go back to the home page. And now when I click an image, it should once again show this. So this is very useful, especially say you're working in an application and you wanted to copy the URL and send it to somebody. It would work. They would just get the full page without the modal. Otherwise, if they go to the application and use it as intended, you'd click on the image and you would get a modal. So you stay on the feed, and that's what modals are useful for. Now, of course, there's many other applications or ways to apply a modal, I should say. One of the most popular ways in business applications is to have a form in a modal. Let's say you have a table of data results for something underneath, and you want to keep those results and continue to work with those results so you don't have to search those in another form every time. But you want to pull up individual items from that table and possibly be able to edit those. So you would typically see something like React table underneath. Then you would be able to click on one of the items and it would launch a modal with a form for all the data of that item. So let me know if you want to see another tutorial It has a modal with a form and some advanced things that can come up when you're working with a form and a modal. It's one of the things I've had to do at my job many times, and I like how Next.js handles that. I've worked with one just recently on a project at work. So let me know in the comments about that, and I hope this tutorial has helped you. Hey guys, giving a quick shout out to my patrons. Holy Coder is a progress provider, and Eldad is a member at the senior level. Also, thank you to all of the junior members. You're all helping me reach my goals. And if you haven't checked out my Patreon, it's got exclusive content and early release content. And it's not one of those Patreons that doesn't get many posts. I'm active on there every week, so please check it out if you haven't. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection. And a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you. And thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.